The airport was its usual bustling self, a microcosm of life with its constant ebb and flow of travelers from all walks of life. The first-class check-in line at Los Angeles International Airport was no exception. It was a space that radiated a certain air of exclusivity, populated by individuals adorned in designer attire, carrying luxury luggage, and moving with the confidence of those accustomed to privilege. Among them stood a man who didn't need flashy accessories or tailored suits to command attention. Clint Eastwood, the iconic actor and director, was a name and face known around the world. At 94 years old, Clint was still as striking as ever. The weathered lines on his face told stories of decades spent in the spotlight, while his piercing eyes carried a depth that hinted at countless untold tales. Dressed in a well-worn leather jacket, a plain shirt, and faded jeans, he stood tall, his posture exuding a quiet but undeniable strength. He had an air of authenticity that few could match, a refreshing contrast in a world often obsessed with appearances. Despite his legendary status, Clint preferred to keep a low profile. He wasn't one to flaunt his fame or demand special treatment. He carried only a single black duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a stark contrast to the opulent luggage set surrounding him. The only hint of his notoriety was the occasional double-take from fellow passengers or the hushed whispers of those who recognized him but respected his privacy. But not everyone in the first-class line was so discreet. Directly behind Clint stood Caroline Whitmore, a woman whose presence was impossible to ignore. In her late 40s, Caroline was the epitome of luxury and high society. Her tailored white dress clung perfectly to her figure, a diamond necklace sparkled at her throat, and her manicured nails gleamed under the airport's fluorescent lights. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the world revolved around her. Caroline prided herself on her ability to assess people at a glance, a skill she often used to judge whether someone belonged. As her eyes scanned Clint, she saw nothing remarkable, no designer labels, no expensive watch, no entourage. To her, he was just an aging man who had wandered into the wrong line. She cleared her throat loudly, a tactic meant to draw attention. Clint didn't react. Instead, he stepped forward as the airline attendant called him to the counter. "Excuse me," Caroline said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the background noise. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for first-class passengers." A hush fell over the surrounding travelers. Some turned their heads to watch, sensing that something interesting was unfolding. Clint paused mid-step, then turned to face Caroline. His expression was calm, almost amused, as if her words were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Caroline's confidence faltered for a split second as she met his gaze. Those eyes, sharp, intense, and full of life, held a power that felt unnervingly familiar. But she quickly recovered, her lips curling into a condescending smile. "I'm just saying," she continued, addressing the growing audience as much as Clint, "some people think they can bend the rules, but rules exist for a reason. First class should mean first class." Clint raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. He didn't bother responding. Instead, he handed his ID and boarding pass to the attendant, who smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood," she said. "We're honored to have you flying with us today." The color drained from Caroline's face. The realization hit her like a freight train. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. How had she not recognized him? She had seen his movies, admired his work, even quoted his lines at dinner parties. Yet here she was, berating a man whose legacy was nothing short of legendary. Caroline's embarrassment was palpable, but Clint didn't seem to notice or care. He took his boarding pass and walked toward the baggage check, his gait as steady and purposeful as ever. The tension in the line lingered long after Clint was gone. Caroline stood frozen, her mind racing as she replayed the interaction. Around her, whispers of recognition and admiration spread among the other passengers. "Was that really Clint Eastwood?" a man asked his companion. "It sure was," the companion replied, "and she just told him he didn't belong in first class." The comment stung, but Caroline couldn't argue. She had made a fool of herself, and everyone knew it. What Caroline didn't realize was that this was only the beginning of her encounter with Clint Eastwood. Fate had a funny way of bringing people together, and their paths were about to cross again in the most unexpected way. The scene at the airport terminal had returned to its usual rhythm, but Carolyn Whitmore's mind was anything but calm. She stood motionless in the first-class line, her thoughts replaying the disastrous encounter with Clint Eastwood like a broken record. How could she have been so blind? This wasn't just any celebrity. It was Clint Eastwood, a man whose name carried gravitas, whose legacy spanned decades of iconic films, and whose very presence commanded respect. Caroline's embarrassment was suffocating. She was used to being in control, to having the upper hand in every situation. Yet here she was, publicly humiliated by her own arrogance. She could feel the judgmental stares of her fellow travelers, hear the whispers that buzzed like static in her ears. Can you believe she said that to Clint Eastwood? She must be mortified. She deserves it, acting like she owns the place. The comments, though hushed, were like daggers to Caroline's pride. She clutched the handle of her designer suitcase, her knuckles turning white. This was supposed to be a routine trip, a seamless journey to New York for yet another glamorous event. Instead, it had become a public spectacle, and she was the unwitting star of the show. Caroline was determined to salvage her dignity. She hurried through check-in and security, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize her. But as she entered the terminal's luxurious lounge for first-class passengers, her heart sank. There he was, Clint Eastwood, sitting calmly in a corner, sipping a black coffee and reading a newspaper. Her immediate reaction was to turn around and leave. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was guilt, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that she owed him an apology. Whatever it was, Caroline found herself walking toward him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As she approached, Clint glanced up from his newspaper. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she felt an inexplicable wave of intimidation. But his expression wasn't harsh or unkind. If anything, it was indifferent, as if he had already forgotten the earlier incident. "Mr. Eastwood," Caroline began, her voice faltering slightly, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said earlier. It was rude and completely uncalled for." Clint folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with a faint smile. "Apology accepted," he said simply. The brevity of his response caught Caroline off guard. She had expected a lecture or, at the very least, a comment about her behavior. But Clint wasn't interested in prolonging the conversation. "Thank you," she said, unsure of what else to add. She hesitated, then gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "May I sit?" Clint shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that neither welcomed nor denied her request. Caroline took it as an invitation and sat down, smoothing her dress nervously. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled only with the distant hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses in the lounge. Caroline wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but she struggled to find the right words. Finally, Clint spoke. "You know, I've been in this business a long time. I've met all kinds of people. Some are genuine and some, well, they're not. You remind me of someone I worked with years ago. Always quick to judge, but deep down, they had a good heart. Took a while for them to show it, though." Caroline blinked, surprised by his candidness. I guess I've always been quick to make assumptions," she admitted. "It's a habit I'm not proud of." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "Habits can be hard to break, but recognizing them is the first step." Caroline found herself nodding in agreement. She was struck by how grounded Clint was, how unpretentious despite his fame. It was a stark contrast to the world she was used to, where status and appearances often overshadowed substance. As they continued to talk, Caroline began to see Clint in a new light. He wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was a man with wisdom, humility, and a depth of character that was rare in any industry. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the loudspeaker. A mechanical issue had delayed their flight, and passengers were advised to remain in the lounge until further notice. "Well," Clint said, standing up and stretching, "looks like we've got some time to kill." Caroline hesitated, then made a bold suggestion. "Would you like to grab a drink? My treat. Consider it an apology for my earlier behavior." Clint raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Sure, why not?" As they made their way to the lounge's bar, Caroline couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Perhaps this delay was an opportunity, not just to make amends, but to learn something from a man whose life and career had been defined by resilience, authenticity, and a refusal to conform to anyone else's expectations. Stay tuned for a story where unexpected events during the delay bring Clint and Caroline closer than anyone could have imagined. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with this incredible story. The bar at the first-class lounge was a sanctuary of understated luxury, with its soft lighting, polished marble counters, and shelves lined with premium spirits from every corner of the globe. Clint Eastwood and Caroline Whitmore took seats at the far end, away from the small clusters of other travelers. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a practiced smile, approached them promptly. "What can I get for you?" he asked, his tone professional yet warm. "I'll take a whiskey neat," Clint said without hesitation. Caroline glanced at the menu briefly. She was tempted to order something extravagant, but she decided against it. "A glass of Chardonnay, please." As the bartender prepared their drinks, Clint leaned back in his chair, studying Caroline with a curious expression. "So what brings you to New York?" he asked. Caroline hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "Work," she said vaguely. "I'm hosting an event. A fundraiser, actually." "For what cause?" Clint asked, his interest genuine. "It's for an arts program," she explained. "We're raising money to provide scholarships for underprivileged students who want to study music, theater, or visual arts." Clint nodded, his respect evident. "That's a noble cause. I've always believed in the power of the arts to change lives." Caroline smiled, her earlier tension beginning to ease. She wasn't used to having such genuine conversations, especially with someone as accomplished as Clint Eastwood. Most people she encountered in her social circles were more interested in appearances and networking than meaningful dialogue. Their drinks arrived and they raised their glasses in a casual toast. "To unexpected encounters," Clint said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "To new perspectives," Caroline replied, surprising herself with the sincerity of her words. As they sipped their drinks, the conversation flowed more naturally. Clint shared anecdotes from his career, tales of the challenges and triumphs that had shaped him over the years. He spoke of the directors who had inspired him, the actors who had pushed him to be better, and the moments when he had doubted himself but persevered anyway. Caroline found herself captivated. She had always admired Clint Eastwood as an actor and director, but hearing his stories firsthand was a revelation. His humility, wisdom, and sense of humor were qualities she hadn't expected. In turn, Clint asked Caroline about her life, her work, and the experiences that had shaped her. At first, she was reluctant to open up, but Clint's genuine interest made it easier. She spoke about her upbringing, the challenges of carving out a career in a competitive industry, and her struggles to balance ambition with authenticity. "I guess I've always felt like I had to prove myself," she admitted, "like I had to be perfect to be taken seriously." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "Perfection's a myth," he said. "It's the mistakes and imperfections that make us human, and sometimes those are the things people connect with the most." Caroline was struck by the simplicity and truth of his words. She had spent so much of her life chasing an ideal, trying to project an image of success and sophistication, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. Their conversation was interrupted by another announcement over the loudspeaker. The flight delay had been extended, and passengers were advised to remain patient. "Well," Clint said, finishing his whiskey, "looks like we've got more time to kill." Caroline laughed softly. "At this rate, we'll end up spending the night in the lounge." Clint chuckled. "Wouldn't be the worst thing. At least the company's good." Caroline felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She wasn't sure if it was the wine, the conversation, or simply the unexpected connection she had found with a man she had once dismissed as just another celebrity. Whatever it was, it felt genuine. As the evening wore on, the bar began to empty out. Most of the other passengers had either left to explore the airport or retreated to quieter corners of the lounge. Clint and Caroline, however, remained engrossed in their conversation. They talked about everything: art, life, dreams, regrets. Clint shared stories of his time behind the camera, the lessons he had learned about leadership and creativity. Caroline spoke about her passion for the arts, her belief in their ability to inspire and uplift. At one point, Clint said something that stayed with her. "You know, life's like a movie. You don't always get to write the script, But you can choose how you act in each scene. And sometimes the best moments happen when you least expect them. Caroline smiled, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't worried about appearances or expectations. She was simply present, enjoying the moment. As the night drew to a close, Clint glanced at his watch. "Looks like we've talked the night away," he said with a smile. Caroline looked around, realizing the lounge was nearly empty. "I guess we did," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. They exchanged contact information before parting ways, promising to stay in touch. As Caroline watched Clint walk away, she felt a sense of gratitude. What had started as a disastrous encounter had turned into something unexpected and meaningful. Weeks had passed since the fateful encounter in the airport lounge. Carolyn Whitmore often thought about Clint Eastwood and their unexpected connection. She had returned to her busy life in New York, hosting her fundraising gala and immersing herself in the whirlwind of social events. But something had shifted within her. Clint's words, his perspective on life, and the authentic way he carried himself had left a lasting impression. One crisp autumn afternoon, Carolyn found herself at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of her favorite places to escape the pressures of her world. She strolled through the European Paintings Gallery, losing herself in the brushstrokes of Van Gogh and Monet. The quiet elegance of the museum was a balm for her restless mind. As she turned a corner, she caught sight of a familiar figure standing in front of a large, dramatic painting. Clint Eastwood. For a moment, Caroline thought her mind was playing tricks on her. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. But Clint must have sensed her presence because he turned, his piercing gaze softening when he recognized her. "Carolyn," he said with a warm smile. "Fancy meeting you here." She smiled back, her earlier hesitation melting away. "Clint, what are you doing in New York?" "Work," he replied simply. "I'm scouting locations for a new project. Thought I'd stop by the Met while I was here." They fell into step together, wandering through the museum and picking up their conversation as if no time had passed. Clint's presence was as grounding as ever, and Caroline felt a sense of ease she rarely experienced with anyone else. As they meandered through the galleries, Clint asked about her fundraiser. Caroline explained how the event had been a success, raising more money than she had anticipated. She described the students who would benefit from the scholarships, their stories of resilience and talent. "That's incredible," Clint said, his admiration evident. "You're making a real difference." Caroline blushed at the compliment. "I'm trying," she said modestly, "but it's people like you who inspire me to keep going." Clint chuckled. "Me? I'm just an old cowboy trying to tell stories." They shared a laugh, the kind that came easily between them. But their reunion wasn't just about reminiscing. As they moved through the museum, their conversation deepened. Caroline confided in Clint about her struggles to find balance in her life, the pressures of maintaining her public image, and her fears of not being enough. Clint, in turn, shared his thoughts on aging, the legacy he wanted to leave behind, and the lessons he had learned about living authentically. "You know," Clint said at one point, pausing to look at a painting of a solitary figure on a stormy beach, "life's too short to waste on things that don't matter. It's the connections we make, the people we touch, that give it meaning." Carolyn nodded, his words resonating deeply. She thought about the people in her life, the relationships she had neglected in her pursuit of success. Clint's wisdom was like a mirror, reflecting the changes she needed to make. As the afternoon turned into evening, Clint suggested they grab dinner at a nearby cafe. Over a simple but delicious meal, they continued their conversation, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. By the time they parted ways, Caroline felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. Clint's presence in her life, however brief, had been transformative. A few weeks later, Caroline received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Clint, along with a signed copy of the script for his upcoming film. The note read, "Caroline, you reminded me why I tell stories in the first place. Thank you for that. Keep inspiring others, and don't forget to take time for yourself. Your friend, Clint." Caroline smiled as she read the note, her heart full of gratitude. She placed it on her desk, a reminder of the man who had changed her perspective in ways she hadn't anticipated. From that day forward, Caroline approached her life with a renewed sense of purpose. She prioritized the things that truly mattered, nurtured her relationships, and embraced imperfection. And every so often, she and Clint would catch up, their friendship a testament to the power of unexpected connections. As she stood before a room full of scholarship recipients at her next fundraiser, Caroline shared Clint's words with them. Life's too short to waste on things that don't matter. It's the connections we make, the people we touch, that give it meaning. The audience erupted into applause, but Caroline's mind was elsewhere. She thought of Clint, his wisdom, and the lasting impact he had made on her life. And in that moment, she realized that the most meaningful stories were the ones written not on the page, but in the hearts of those we meet along the way.